Welcome to episode 61 of the Yes You Coaching podcast. I'm your host, Anna Manning, and today we're going to be talking about a little thing that many of us do, that I used to do, that probably a lot of my clients do, and probably a lot of you lovely podcast listeners are doing too. Beating yourself up in order to improve yourself. Now, beating yourself up, when I say that, I mean giving yourself a hard time, chastising yourself, rubbishing your efforts, like being very harsh or strict with yourself, criticizing your attempts at things, endlessly pointing out the faults and failures, maybe causing yourself a bit of stress in that way, maybe calling yourself a few names. So, self criticism, which I'm talking about when I'm talking about beating yourself up, is described as harsh scrutiny and negative self evaluation and an excessive concern with personal failure. So it can be a way to try and correct or improve ourselves or persecute ourselves for failures or so called failures. And I went down a bit of a research rabbit hole this week. I think I think that I've got more time. Now, I have just embarked on a 4-day work week. I'm not working 5 days anymore. I'm working 4 days. And one of the delightful side effects of that apparently is that I think I have more time. And so I'm really going down loads of research rabbit holes, which I'm really enjoying. I don't know if you do that, but for me, it's very enjoyable. It's like going down a Wikipedia rabbit hole. So, I've been looking at and diving into some of the research about beating yourself up to improve yourself, about self criticism. And it's pretty well established that it's associated with depressive symptoms, with loneliness, with seeking less social support. It's been looked at in all different areas. So, in clinical settings, in non clinical settings. Um, but it's also something that I coach on a lot of the time because I'm a confidence coach. And one of the things that prevents people from feeling confident is getting beaten up all the time. So I'm hoping that most people, and actually most of the people I work with would say they don't work in an environment where they're, excessively criticized, where they kind of get beaten up for the stuff that they do. Most of the beating up is going on inside their own head. And I'm going to caveat everything I'm saying in this episode with this is what we're talking about here. So I'm not talking about you being criticized and beaten up by other people, like by your boss, by your team, by your clients. I hope that that isn't happening, because if that isn't happening, of course, that's going to have a negative impact on your confidence. But I'm talking about the kind of beating up that goes on internally, so inside our own head. And maybe you're like me in that you love a bit of self improvement. And I'm guessing that you do because you're actually taking the time to listen to a podcast about how to grow your confidence at work. And that is, I think, a great thing that some of us have that desire to grow and develop and to, take hold of things and to improve things. And it can also have a downside. And the downside that I've found is that the desire to make things better and the desire to improve and the desire to develop and to grow and to keep learning can come at a cost if the way that you're doing that growth and development and that learning and that kind of pushing yourself, the method that you're using to do that is beating yourself up. So, in order to continually improve, in order to make sure that you're doing good work, in order to make sure that you're not, slacking off and that you're giving the best you can and you're most likely to get promotion, etc., etc. The method you could be using to drive all of that is this kind of self-critical, engaging in harsh self-scrutiny, negative self-evaluation, being really concerned with any failures, in order to try and correct or improve yourself or persecute yourself for failures as you see them. So often when I get into this with clients, they're really convinced. And I don't know, maybe I used to be too. It's been such a long time since I did this work. But my clients are usually really convinced that beating themselves up is an absolutely stellar tactic. Like it's a really good idea. And that usually goes something like this. Like, I need to beat myself up in order to make sure that one, I don't make mistakes, two, in order to like ensure that I do good work, in order to ensure that I progress, to kind of keep me in line, to make sure I get things done. And you may be thinking the same thing. So, if you beat yourself up, do you generally think that that's a good way of dealing with yourself? Would you kind of agree with my clients that this is a good tactic to make sure that, you're not making mistakes, you're not slacking off, that make sure you're doing good work and you're progressing and you're keeping yourself in line? And because I coach people around work issues, I like to think about this through a work lens. So I like to explore with people, how do you need to be managed in order to be at your best? So, what kind of manager or boss would you have if you were going to be at your best? And I did one of the Grow Your Professional Confidence masterclasses this week, on Monday this week. And in that class, we have a really thorough exercise which takes you through and lets you think about what kind of boss, what kind of management, what kind of leadership you would need in order to be at your most confident, be at your best, be at your most effective, be doing your best work. And most people can be pretty clear about that when they're asked. They kind of instinctively know. And you probably know, like, in order to be at your best, what kind of management do you need? What kind of leadership do you need? How do you need your team to behave towards you? Like, in order to make sure that you don't make mistakes, in order to make sure you do good work, in order to make sure that you progress, to kind of keep you in line, to make sure you get things done. All of the things that or let me say, all of the things that people tell me that they need to beat themselves up for, so i.e., in order to keep themselves in line, make sure they're doing good work, etc. If I asked you, okay, so do you want to be managed like that in order to make sure you do your best work? Do you want your boss to beat you up in order to make sure that you do your best work? And then people are like, oh, no, not really. So, what about you? If you're thinking that beating yourself up is a good method, is like a good tactic for managing yourself, do you need your boss or your colleagues to be quite strict with you, quite critical of you in order to make sure that you do good work and to make sure that you progress and to keep you in line and to make sure that you get things done? Do you need your boss and your colleagues to beat you up in order to do all of that? Honestly, to this day, I've never actually had anyone who's told me, yes, I need my boss to treat me like that in order to make sure that I give my best at work and in order to help me be at my most effective and at my most confident. So we think that we need to be beaten up by ourselves in order to make sure that we don't make mistakes, in order to make sure we do good work, in order to make sure that, we keep in line, that we make good progress, that we get things done. We think we need to be beaten up by ourselves. But we do not think we would need other people to treat us that way in order for us to do our best work. Curious. So at this point, I'm getting very curious with a client. So I've checked in with them. Why do you beat yourself up? Oh, in order to do good work, etc. Do you want your boss to do that to you in order to make sure you do good work? They're like, no way. Okay, well, that is interesting. We have an interesting finding. So I usually ask people, and I'm going to ask you to think about this too. What do you think would happen if your boss treated you like you treat you? So, if your boss was very strict, very harsh, very critical, if they kind of generally beat you up for things in order to keep you in line and keep you doing your best work, How do you think that would go as a tactic for you? And they usually tell me something like that honestly that would prevent them from doing their best work. People say stuff like, well, it would make me quite anxious. It might make me afraid. It would have me procrastinating. I probably wouldn't want to work for that person. Some people even say, I wouldn't work for that person. I'd put in a grievance, I'd leave, etc. So it's interesting. When it's us, we think we need to be beaten up in order to do good work, do our best work, make sure we don't slack off, be at our most effective. But when it's somebody else outside of us and we're asked, do you need somebody else to do that to you, to beat you up in order for you to do your best work and you're being most effective? They say no. And not only that, but if somebody was actually doing that to me, and you may have had this experience with a boss, I hope you haven't, but you might have, then they say, well, that wouldn't help me to do my best work at all. In fact, I probably wouldn't do very good work. I'd be anxious, I'd be procrastinating, I'd be afraid, I'd be over checking everything, I'd be overworking. Right. So it's interesting. And in fact, there is, because I said I went down a research rabbit hole this week, there is quite a lot of science that backs up you saying that if you are being badly treated, if you're being beaten up with overly harsh, critical comments, etc., that it is detrimental to your well being and it's detrimental to the work that you're trying to do. So, one of the research studies that I looked at was very interesting. And this was actually about self criticism and about stress induced changes in your biochemistry when you are being self critical. So, this study was looking at it was just done on women actually. I don't know what the rationale for that was. I don't think they actually explained that. But what they found was that when people were subjecting themselves to self-criticism, I guess they actually had to do that as part of this experiment, as part of this research. There was stress induced changes in their biochemistry. So physiologically, it had an impact on them even 40 minutes after the stressor. So 40 minutes after they've been asked to self-criticize, it was still having a change, an impact, a stress-induced change on their biochemistry, so on their physiology. And I thought that was really interesting. And what it also did was and this I just thought was absolutely amazing. It actually made it harder for people to do the piece of work they were being asked to do while they were self-criticizing. So they were asked to do something and then they had to criticize themselves while they were doing it. And their scores, they looked at their scores on something called the confusion bewilderment scale. I really need to actually look at this confusion bewilderment scale. So there's this confusion bewilderment scale on the profile of mood states, and the people who were self criticizing and had this stress induced change on their biochemistry scored higher on this confusion bewilderment scale. So they found it harder to do the thing that they were trying to do, as well as it having a stress response reaction. So there's actually research that suggests that if you are being self critical, it's making the work you have to do harder because it's increasing your score on the confusion bewilderment scale. And it's having a stress induced change on your biochemistry. And you can go on this research rabbit hole yourself. But further, self criticism is positively linked with a range of mental health conditions, including depression, anxiety, eating disorders, PTSD, addictions, and self harm. That's fairly well evidenced in the literature. So, next time that you're beating yourself up or otherwise being very harsh and strict with your criticism in order to keep yourself in line and make sure that you're doing your best work, remember the research doesn't back that up. as a good idea. In fact, the research as we see it right now, because things change, right? In research, things change, right? But what we see right now is that the research is suggesting that it's going to increase your level of difficulty in terms of what you're trying to do, and it's going to change your biochemistry because of stress-induced changes to your biochemistry. And most people will say, I need to criticize myself. I need to beat myself up. Or, I wouldn't do my best work. I wouldn't stay in line, whatever. But when you look at the research, it seems to suggest that you're doing the exact opposite. And your own wisdom is going to tell you that beating yourself up might not be the best way to go. Because you only have to answer the question. If you had a boss or colleagues who were continually beating you up, and their justification for doing so was that, they were just trying to keep you in line and make sure that you do your best work. Oh, hell no. You'd be out of there like a shot. Imagine if you go to a HR person and say, my boss is very critical. They're always beating me up. And the HR person summons in your boss, and your boss says, "Oh, yes, I am actually. I'm very self-critical of Anna. I'm very critical of Anna. And the reason that I do it is because she needs me to do that. She needs me to be very critical of her in order to keep her in line and in order to make sure she does her best work and, blah, blah, blah." Can you imagine what the HR person would say? They would be like, "Are you serious?" There would be serious issues, wouldn't there? If that's what your boss said. Anna needs me to treat her like that in order to do her best work. So, you don't want your boss to do it. And now you know that the research doesn't exactly support you doing it either. But what if you're thinking, "Oh, okay, well, I get that, but Anna, I am not my boss, right? I don't want anyone else to criticize me, but it's okay if I do it to myself because I'm in more of like a close personal relationship with myself." So, for some reason, the normal rules relating to workplace civility and general respect do not apply to the relationship that I have with myself. Let's check this out. So, I want you to imagine that, think of someone that you're in a close personal relationship with, like a very close friend or a partner or a parent. And then answer this question. Do you need that person to beat you up in order to keep you in line and to encourage you to do your best work in the world? No, of course you don't. And now imagine that you were chatting to a friend and they said, I like my friends to be extremely critical of me because it keeps me doing my best, and it makes sure that I stay in line. You'd be thinking, "Oh dear, this person's being, emotionally abused and they don't even know." That would be so awful. And here's another way of thinking about it. If you're a people leader, people manager, and even if you're not, just imagine that you are for a moment. Think about how you'd want to interact with the people who work for you. So, do you beat up and harshly criticize the people that work for you in order to keep them in line and to help them to do their best work? Do you? Hell, of course you don't. And why not? Well, when I ask people that question, like, if okay, so you don't treat other people, like, harshly and be very critical with them, why not? And they say, "Well, because that I would be a terrible manager. I would people would be afraid and they wouldn't dare try new things, and it would stymie any creativity and innovation, and it would lead to, like, terrible morale and a lot of workplace stress and maybe even staff turnover, and they wouldn't feel very confident." Well, that's interesting, isn't it? So, you don't want anyone else to treat you like that. You definitely don't wanna treat your team or the people that work for you like that. You don't want anyone in a close personal relationship to treat you like that. And if they did, you probably would tell me that it wouldn't have a great impact on you. And if you're still thinking, well, that's all great, Anna, and I can see your logic, but it just doesn't apply to me. I do still need to be very harsh and critical and beat myself up in order to make sure that I do a good job. I just want you to close your I'm going to go woo on you for a second. And I want you to close your eyes for a moment, and I just want you to let your like spirit, your being answer this question. Okay? So just close your eyes. Not if you're driving, obviously do not close your eyes if you're driving. And don't answer me this question with your brain, but just sit in the quiet and see what answer arises. Do you want to be beaten up? And if your answer was no, is there any other way of doing it? If this is how you have been managing yourself or you do manage yourself, is there another way? Is there any other way of managing you in such a way that would support you doing good work and that would support you to progress and that would support you to get things done? And I'm going to suggest, yeah, there is another way of managing you in order to make sure that you do your best work. And you already know it. You're already familiar with it because you're already doing it for other people. If you're being supportive, encouraging, acknowledging, realistic to others, there you go. There's the other way. Maybe that's the other way that would help you to do your best work. Because for some of you, you might have been beating yourself up for years. I know that I had. And it never even occurred to me that maybe there was another way. But there is. There is a whole range of ways in which you can manage someone. And there's a whole range of ways in which you could manage you. And some of them are going to create fear and panic and anxiety and terror and stress. And some of them are going to create a willingness to give things a go and a confidence and well-being and resilience. Does that mean everything's going to be perfect? No. Not everything's perfect, even if you're managed really well. You still have challenges, you still have difficulties, things still go wrong. But when you're being managed in a supportive, encouraging way that acknowledges you and is fair and is respectful and is reasonable, that's the environment where you thrive. That's the environment that even when challenges come, you can deal with them. That's the environment where even if you fall down, you can get back up and keep going. You do not have to beat yourself up. There is another way. The question is, will you take it? Okay, that's all I have for you this week. I will see you in next week's episode. Bye.